welcome back to Shemsuniverse. So today, guys, we're going to discuss Uranus and all 12 of the astrological zodiac signs. So with Uranus, guys, it's very similar to Rahu in the sense of it brings forth radical change unexpectedly. This is a generational planet. It lasts for about 7 years within each part. It does go on retrograde randomly, so it does, even in the midst of it going into several years, it can just sometimes switch for a couple months to another astrological sign. So if you do want to know that, ask me. I'll calculate your sign so you know exactly which one it is. All right, so let's get right into it. So how Uranus is going to interpret in your life is it's going to actually show you where you can make radical change in the world, and also how radical change is going to affect you. Right now we're going through the Taurian, the Taurus within Uranus for the next until 2026. We're going to get into that in a second though. So first off, we have Uranus in Aries. Uranus in Aries means that this is going to be a time in which your self-image and the way in which we portray ourselves is going to have a huge effect on the world. Cue in 2010 the selfie industry, the Kim Kardashian glow. This is when people actually really viewed themselves as very spectacular. A lot of narcissism came about during this time, and that was the radical change of social media and being obsessed with yourself. That self-obsession and that just interpretation of self changes the world around you. We all know how we interpret ourselves is how our reflection of the world is going to be. So when you have that sort of viewpoint, that sort of mindset, that does affect everything that's around you, and in turn, the way people are viewing themselves is going to affect you as well. Moving on, next we have Uranus in Taurus. Uranus in Taurus means it's going to be a drastic change in money. Things like cryptocurrency is very popular now, Forex. All of these things make drastic changes within our lives. And if you do have your Uranus in Taurus, that means that you're meant to actually show people different ways to make money, different ways to provide stability, and different ways to actually just go about your day-to-day living, how to acquire luxurious goods and become rich. Next, we have Uranus in Gemini. Uranus in Gemini portrays with your communication styles, from talking over the telephone to social media to using the internet. All of these things are examples of Uranus in Gemini. What happens here is when you have Uranus in Gemini, you're somebody whose communication can actually change the world. You're meant to actually use your talking ability, your speech, your actions to actually show people different ways to think and different ways to communicate with the world around them. Moving on, next we have Uranus in Cancer. Uranus in Cancer is all about family values, ancestry, and what happens is when you're going through your lineage, you might have different changes that take place. Family units, the whole housewife adage back in the day in the 1950s and 60s is when actually Uranus was in Cancer. It went from housewife to feminism to radical movements in that regard. So people actually started realizing that the whole metro family, this whole heterosexual family thing, it's not exactly the way it goes in the future. We've made drastic changes since then, and families have now changed with sexual orientation, who the breadwinner is, and so forth. Moving on, next we have Uranus in Leo. Uranus in Leo has everything to do with performing. If you have this here, that means that your performance, your artistic skills, your music, your dance, Uranus here is going to make sure that that has a huge effect on the world. That was an adage in the early 60s of the rock and roll age, when rock and roll did have a huge precedent on the world. Rebellion, things like that were taking precedent and actually had a huge, I would say it just was a bridge to the new world that we live in today when it comes to music and how media affects our kids and so forth as well. Next one, we have Uranus in Virgo. When Uranus is in Virgo, this has a lot to do with like detail orientation. This has a lot to do with people actually focusing on the minuscule or finer details of life. So when you have Uranus here, you're meant to actually use your sort of detailed eye to actually make changes in the world by deconstructing structures, deconstructing ideologies, and picking apart where things may be wrong or where things may be right. Moving on, next we have Uranus in Libra. This has everything to do with relationships. So when you have Uranus in Libra, you're meant to actually divulge yourself into relationships, explore others, but you're meant to actually make changes by doing this, by actually showing people that there's different ways to have relationships, there's different sort of friendship groups you can have, and it's not always this adage of like what's on Disney Channel where it's just like you meet a best friend from an early age and you guys stick together your whole life. You may meet people at school, during hobbies, during protests. That's where relationships and justice really does take precedent. So if you have that there, you're meant to really explore the interpersonal relations with other people and then make changes in that sort of way. Next, we have Uranus in Scorpio. This has everything to do with research, new developments, and new ideologies. This has to do with self-transformation. So the self-transformation that you make can be an example for your community and the world around you. When you transform yourself of being maybe like an anorexic slim guy like myself to, of course, like a bodybuilding Hulk that goes to the world and all of a sudden becomes financially independent, that's going to have a huge precedent on the people around you and give an influential road for people to then follow. So you're paving the road for other people when it comes to self-transformation. Things like self-help books were made in that sort of era. Also things like that were really negative, like HIV and AIDS, were also made in that era as well. Next, we have Uranus in Sagittarius. This is everything to do with different research, developments, education, and just how we view it, our intellectualism as a whole. When this is here, this is actually taught us that you don't actually have to go to post-secondary to become successful. The major change here is when you flip the whole ideology of having to go to school, having to go to post-secondary, flip it upside down and do something different, and you explore different cultures and different avenues of doing things. That's where Uranus takes precedent here. So if you have Uranus there, make sure you're paying special attention to how you're doing with your education. Make sure that your education is something that's actually self-taught, self-inflicted, meaning that you're not just following your parents, you're not just following what they said to do, you're actually exploring new avenues of learning and then making a career out of it yourself. Next is my generation, Uranus in Capricorn. Uranus in Capricorn means that you're actually looking at status, power, and money, and you're figuring out different ways to get there. The 9-to-5 era is done. What I'm doing on YouTube right now proves it. There's YouTubers that are making $20 million a year at 7 years old, and you have people that are doctors not even making half that amount, not even a quarter of that. So now we've shown you in this generation that millennials and going forth will not be getting jobs, we won't be getting education, we don't really necessarily need that in order to be very, very successful. Having specialized knowledge takes much more precedent over what your education may or may not be. Moving on, next we have Uranus in Aquarius. This is a very humanitarian place to have it. This is all about really looking at the world as a whole and seeing how you can actually change this, the home of it as well, right? So what you have here is how can you cause political reform? How can you cause educational reform, scientific reform, innovations? During this time is when drastic innovations and drastic ideas of self-awareness will come about. If you have that there, make sure you're focusing on your spirituality, make sure you're focusing on what value you can add to the market, and something will come to you and it'll just click. Follow your sixth sense and do not follow logic if you have that there. Finally, we have Uranus in Pisces. When you have Uranus in Pisces, this simply means that you have a very spiritual ideology. You're meant to actually look at your belief system, whether that be through God, through Christianity, Muslim, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever it may be, and explore different avenues. When you're able to explore different avenues, you can then achieve success because you're going to get spiritual ascension by following your own path, not the path of other people. There's going to be drastic change here. It may be negative, may be positive, but if you go down that path, it's not going to be paved smooth, might be rigid, but it's worth it. That should conclude everything, guys. If you guys do have any questions whatsoever, just please let me know in the comments. Aside from that, like, subscribe. Holla at me. That's it for today, guys. Peace.